We're Lamed Aleph from the base, 31b. And we were discussing, towards the end of the page, the last thing we left off yesterday was the spacing between two paragraphs of Shema. Shema is made up of two paragraphs of Mezuzah. Mezuzah is made up of two paragraphs. The first is Shema, the second V'hayim Shemaya. And here we have the spacing like this. At the end of the line there's some spacing, and the beginning of the next line there's some spacing. We're going to get to we'll hopefully get to understanding how we got to this conclusion. It's not 1000% clear, but at least something we'll understand. And like I demonstrated, I can show you every Mezuzah I have here is like that. And it seems to me it's a common practice. I haven't seen a Mezuzah which is not like that. Every Mezuzah I have ends with space and begins the next paragraph with some space. As well as, like we said yesterday, Al Aretz at the end of the line. That's universal. That we learned yesterday. That the Al Aretz should be as far away from the Shemayim. But then again, this spacing at the end of the line, at the beginning of the line, we'll see today how we got to this conclusion. Okay. So let's see. First, let's learn the Gemara, and then we'll try to analyze a little bit of what we're getting. So let's back up a little line. Amr Ab Chelbai, fourth to last line in Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, 31b. Fourth to last line, and the middle of the line says Amr Ab Chelbai. Amr Ab Chelbai, Rab Chelbai said, Chazina le Rav Huna, I saw the Mezuzah of Rav Huna, the Karech le, that he rolled his Mezuzah, and we began this paragraph at the end of yesterday's class. The Karech le, he would roll his Mezuzah me'echad klapei Shema, from the left side going inward to the right side. So from me'echad to Shema, as opposed to from right side to left side, or as opposed to the other way. And that's like how we do it. We roll it from left inward to the right side. Yeah, we talked about it yesterday. And then we said, and Rav Huna would make the spacing between the parshes, right? Parshes, we said yesterday, means sections. The Torah is made up of sections, which are defined by spacings in the way they're written in the Torah. And we explained yesterday how there are two different ways in which spacing can be made between sections. One is called a stuma, a closed spacing. That is to say, the next section begins in the same line that the first one ended, but with some space in between the two of them. So it's closed. There's spacing, but it's closed at the end. It's not open to the end of the line. Yeah.
But less than 9 spaces.
It's supposed to be not. There's a big machlekes between the Rambam and the Rosh as to what exactly the definition of a psucha is, of a stuma. What's exactly the definition of a closed spacing? But the general rule is, so long as the next paragraph begins on the same line that the other one ended, with some space in the middle. And yes, the commonly accepted practice is that the spacing should be 9 letters. The spacing of 9 letters. But it's a big machlekes. And what happens if you end up ending too late in the line, you can't make 9? You leave a whole space at the end, and it gets all kinds of complicated discussions. But that's the general rule, that the ending of the last section and the beginning of the next section is on the same line with some space in the middle. That means a closed paragraph, a closed section, because the spacing is closed within the same line.
The 9 letters is a minimum. It could be more than that.
It's a minimum. It could be more. That's correct. It's a minimum of 9 letters.
Minimum, yeah.
But again, the Shulchan Aruch mentions it's machlekes between the Rosh and the Rambam, and the Ramah. Is his view, and the Ramah is his view, and the commentaries have their view. It's a complicated discussion. So, but the other option is psuchos, which are that the section ends, and you leave it open all the way to the end of the line, and then next paragraph begins at the beginning of the next line. Right? Now, as I showed you in our mezuzahs, we have neither of those. Right, we have space on both. Space at the end of the last paragraph and the beginning of the next paragraph. So we'll try to get to why we have that. But at the moment we see that Rav Chelbai tells us that Rav Huna's mezuzah was Parshei Soya Stumos. The spacing between the first and second parsha, the parsha of Shema and the parsha of Vahaya, or the spacing between the last word of the first parsha, which is Uvisharecha, and the first word of the next parsha, which is Vahaya. Those two words were written on the same line with some space in between. Stumos, it was a closed division between the two sections of the Torah. So it's not like our mezuzah, or at least not seemingly. At least not the way Rashi explains it for us. So Meisvei, the Gemara raises the following objection. So, as I mentioned before, when a question is raised introduced by the word Meisvei, it means an objection from a source greater than the one speaking. So the one speaking, or the one who's acting in this case, is Rav Huna, who's a sage of the Gemara age, is a Marda, and we're quoting now a source from the Tanaic age. Amr Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, he observed that Rabbi Rabbi Meir, the famous Tana Rabbi Meir, Hayakoisva, the last line of Lamed Aleph from the base. Hayakoisva, he would write his mezuzah, ala duchstus, duchsus tus. It's hard to pronounce the word. Duchsus tus, I think. And the duchsus tus is the inner layer of the animal hide. So the animal hide is made up of two layers. There's the outer layer, which is closer to the hair, and the inner layer that's closer to the flesh. And so to make proper parchment, you actually separate the two and treat either of them, and you can write on either of them. One is called klaf, and one is called duchsus tus. So the inner layer is not as strong as the outer layer. The inner layer is a thinner membrane, whereas the outer layer is much thicker leather, or a much thicker parchment. So you would use the softer one, the inner one. It's not the common practice today. Most of the rest, I think all of it, I'm not even sure anybody uses the duchsus tus, I don't know. But we all use the cloth, the outer layer. But Rabbi Meir would use the inner layer. So that's the first thing that Rabbi Shimon Lazar observed about Rabbi Meir's mezuzah, that he used the inner layer of the parchment. Likewise, Kimin Daf, he made it like a page of the Torah. That is to say, it's not like this mezuzah, which is long, it's kind of square. Like the typeset is kind of a square. His mezuzah was long and narrow like a Torah. So in order to make this long and narrow like a Torah, you'd have to have much less words on a line, essentially. Which is fine. We mentioned before that a mezuzah could be as narrow as 2 words per line. Right? We said it could be quite narrow. That's how you did it. Very narrow. And likewise, and he left margins on the top of his parchment and the bottom of his parchment. Likewise, so how many things he observed so far? So far, 3. He observed that he used the duchsus tus, the inner part of the parchment, the inner layer, the membrane. Number 1. Number 2, he would be thin and narrow, or long and narrow columns as opposed to wide and square kind of. And number 3, he would have a margin at the top and the bottom of his mezuzah. He was particular about that. And number 4, and he made the separation between the 2 parshas open. Now the way we understand this, at least the way Rashi is teaching it us, this is what seems from the way Rashi is teaching us, that Rabbi Meir's mezuzah, at the end of the first paragraph, which the last word is ubisharecha, he would leave that line empty till the end, and the word v'haya would begin at the beginning of the next line. Okay?
That's the definition of the...
Psucha is open, the way we've been describing it.
Yeah, we've been describing it.
Yeah. Patuach, open. The end of the line is open. Yes. So Amarti Lo, Rabbi Shimon ben Lazar says, I asked Rabbi Meir, Rabbi, my teacher, Matam Amarli. Sorry, Matam. What's the reason, Matam? What's the reason why you're leaving it open? Why are you leaving the parsha, the end of Sharecha, open to the end of the line, and then starting the next parsha, the next paragraph, V'haya, at the beginning of the next line? Why are you a psucha as opposed to a stuma? Amarli, he told me, Hayol and smuchis min Torah, because they are not near each other in the Torah. So when each of these parshas, actually, at least the parsha of Shema, which concludes with V'sharecha, when it's written in the Torah, it is the end of a parsha, so there is a spacing, but it's a stuma. It's a closed spacing, the way it appears in the Torah. The next parsha in the Torah begins in the same line as the word V'sharecha ends. So why aren't you treating the mezuzah the same way, is what Rabbi Shimon ben Lazar is asking of his teacher, Rabbi Meir. And Meir says the reason why I'm not treating it the same way is because in the Torah the next parsha is whatever it is. But here, V'hayim Shemaya comes way later. They aren't near each other in the Torah. So I can't treat it the same way. Following? In the Torah, when one paragraph is going in the sequence the way it's supposed to, so at the end of V'sharecha, I leave the proper spacing, which is a stuma, a closed spacing. Whereas in this scenario, where one paragraph is coming from one chapter, one part of Devarim, another one's coming from a few chapters later, they aren't near each other in the Torah, so I'm leaving it an open space to make a full separation. Okay? So now we have logic for both directions. We had Rav Huna, who earlier said that he makes it a closed paragraph specifically. Why a closed paragraph? Because in the Torah it's a closed paragraph. And here we have Rabbi Meir who's saying leave it open. Why open? Because they aren't near each other in the Torah. They come from 2 different parts of the Torah.
It's kind of like the poetry analogy, right?
Kind of. Over here he's talking about how do we treat the relationship between the 2 parshas? Do we say because they come from different parts of the Torah, leave them open-ended, open end of section, or a psucha, or because in the Torah they appear in a closed paragraph, they should be in a closed paragraph here also. Those are 2 sides of the coin. V'omer Rav Chanano. So this was the Mishnah where a mayor says that he left the end of a Visharecha open to the end. Psucha. V'omer Rav Chanano Amar Rav, and Rav Chanano taught us the name of Rav. Halacha Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. That the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who told us the story about Rav Meir. My love. So the Gemara comments. My love. Is it not a psuchis that when I say the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, it's referring to the way in which I end the paragraph, namely that it should be opened? And if that's the case, it's a contradiction to Rav Huna, who said that the mezuzah should be, or he made his mezuzah, he's particular to make his mezuzah as a closed paragraph. Contradiction. Says the Gemara, no contradiction. Why? Like, when we were told that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, he's not talking about the way in which you end your paragraph, but a revach. He's talking about the margin at the top and the bottom, right? There were 4 things he observed from his teacher. One of the 4 things is that there should be margins in the top and the bottom of your mezuzah. So when Rav Chanano said in the name of Rav that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, he wasn't clear as to which one of these 4 observations he's talking about. So we just assumed he's talking about the way in which you end the paragraph, and that became a contradiction to Rav Huna, who ended the paragraph differently. So therefore the Gemara says no, it's talking about one of the other 4 observations, namely the margins at the top and the bottom. The Kamar Ravach, what is considered the margin? What's the requirement margin? And when it came to a Torah, we talked about the requirement margin. At the bottom, you have to have a full tefach, a full fist, and the top 3 fingers. That's the minimum margins on your Torah, top and bottom. So what's the minimum margins on a Torah? On a mezuzah, you can't have it that big. It would make every mezuzah double the size. So the Gemara says, what's the amount of the margin? Amar Rav Menachot bar Yaakov. Rav Menachot bar Yaakov said, Amrila and others say it wasn't Rav Menachot bar Yaakov who taught us, but Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yaakov was Shmuel son of Yaakov. So either Menachot son of Yaakov or Shmuel son of Yaakov. But they both, either of them said, Kamale Ataba de Sifri. It should be the amount necessary to used by scribes to clip the scroll to your page while you're writing, right? Because scrolls roll up. So you need to make sure it's flat and straight while you're writing. So you have this little clip at the side to hold your parchment down, and then you can write nicely. It's being held down. So that's how much margin you need to have. Just enough time to clip it to the edge. So in other words, there's no particular amount, just as long as you can hold it down and write it properly. That's not
like with Megillah when we put the.
Yeah, like Megillah, you have a clip to hold it
Just
down.
enough to hold the clothespins.
Yeah. So just pins to be able to hold it down while you're writing. Okay, so now
Why doesn't this mezuzah have a proper margin at the top and the bottom?
it does. It's a small little margin. How big is a clip? Tiny.
Yeah, even this large one isn't much because the margin is very small.
Even this. How big is it?
Oh, okay.
Small margin. It's enough to clip it. How big do you need to clip? Actually, what they use now is what I've seen, at least the pictures look like they have they put a board,
Yeah.
and then they have 2 tight ropes in the top and the bottom. So they're very, very thin ropes, but they're very tight. And you slide the parchment inside of it, and it holds it open. And then when they check mezuzahs, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll have such a board on a glass board with a light behind it, making every letter very clear. So it's held down tight against the glass thing, and then the light behind it. I've seen this. I don't know if you're required by halacha to have this whole fancy thing, but the way that I've seen that done. Anyway, it's not respect to the way we do things. So because of this back and forth, the Shulchan Aruch says like this. The spacing between, I'm translating as I'm reading, the spacing between the parsha, the section of Shema, and the parsha of Ahayim Shemaya, the 2 parshas in your mezuzah, mitzvah la'asoisa, it's a mitzvah, meaning not that it's a requirement, but it should be done. Parsha stuma, it should be a closed parsha. That is to say, the ending, uvisharacha, ending of the first paragraph. And the beginning of the next paragraph, v'haya, should be on the same line with some space in the middle. Right? The imaso psucha, but if you did it open to the end, Ksheda, it's kosher. Why? Because they're not near each other in the Torah. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. The Rambam says a similar thing as well. So it's kind of combining both. It's saying that initially it's a mitzvah to do like Rav Huna did it, with a closed opening. But if you didn't do it that way, it's okay because we had a mayor who did it like the Torah where it's not near each other. So what do we do in the end? So let's look at Tosfos. And it seems to me that this is how we got to our conclusion. Look at Tosfos in the top of Lamed Beis and Lamed Aleph. There's a big bold letters. This actually comes from a couple of lines later in the Gemara, which we didn't learn yet, but doesn't matter. We can learn it now. Later, the Gemara says that it's our custom today to make it closed. And the Gemara comments that at least in those days, the custom was that the spacing was a closed spacing, not an open spacing, which doesn't seem to follow our mezuzah. Right? So let's see. So Perish Bekontris. Rashi explained that what the meaning of stuma is closed. Tikshiyesh kosov betchilas shita ubesoif shita, when you have writing at the beginning and end of your line, ve'revach be'emtzam, space in the middle, zuhi stuma, this is considered a closed section. That's why we've been describing it. A couple of letters from the last couple of words of the previous paragraph, the first couple of words at the end of the next paragraph with space in the middle on the same line, and that's the definition of stumas, that's the definition of closed. And that's the way you would observe it in our Torah. That's what stumas are. And this is the way Rashi describes stuma. But says Rabbi, Tosfos, I don't think the next part is a quote from Rashi.
Where are we reading from? Sorry.
Reading from Tosfos, the left, it's the column on the left.
This wider column?
Yes, the column left.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, so that's right. I don't think the next line is a quote from Rashi, unless it's a quote from Rashi elsewhere, but I don't see it here. So it says, Tosfos, v'onu noigin, it's our custom. You have to remember that Tosfos, most of the Tosfos is written kind of like the Gemara. And the same way the Gemara is a conglomerate of conversations over generations, Tosfos is also a conglomerate of conversations over generations. So there's no author of Tosfos. They're called the Baalei Tosfos, the authors of Tosfos. Or when you're referring to Tosfos, you actually refer to them in they, in the plural. And a lot of the Baalei Tosfos, the Baalei Tosfos were, the authors of Tosfos were mostly French scholars, as opposed to Sephardic scholars who lived in Spain. And there are many different versions of the Tosfos. Different people who lived in that place who wrote down the conversations that were going on between the scholars of the time will have the same conversation in various different versions. So the Tosfos itself, you have this Tosfos that we have on the side. We don't know who the author is of this one, but you have Tosfos from Rabbi Natan, you have Tosfos from the Rid, you have Tosfos from the Rush, and they're all very similar commentaries because they're the same conversations, but written down in some different fashion. The reason why I'm telling you this is because Rashi, of course, lived in France, and many of the authors of Tosfos were actually Rashi's grandchildren, his daughter's sons, Rabbi Tam, Ri, and others. And it's quite funny how they're constantly arguing with their grandfather. They're always quoting their grandfather's commentary and then arguing with him. But at any rate, when Tosfos writes, Anu Noigim, it's our custom, it's not unreasonable to think that the same thing was happening during Rashi's time. Because it's his grandson, it's the grandchildren, it's within 50 years.
When was Rashi?
When? It's 12th century, right?
11th century.
11th century.
11th.
You're not very bad with dates, but yeah, I'll take it.
No, I think this is about 12th century when he
Well,
died.
both, I feel like maybe
Yeah.
it's both. Excuse
Well,
me,
yeah,
it's both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that era.
It's both.
Yeah,
Just before the Crusades, but that way.
yeah. He was able to deflect, as I mentioned, that Rashi's...
He was able to hold off Crusades at least till after he
Yeah.
died.
in his town, he had the influence in the
Yeah,
schools
they
of
actually,
Torah,
that's right.
and also he
the
had-
Crusades didn't go through his town. He had a good
Yeah.
relationship with some of the
Yeah,
cardinals.
that's right.
Anyway,
So where
so
was he living? Was he in Troyes or?
we're Troyes, and
Yeah.
came from Worms and then went to Troyes, right? Or the other way around?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's right.
Worms then Troyes, or the other way around?
Worms and Troyes.
Either way. At any rate, so Tosfos say, I don't know, it's our custom, and I'm just give this whole background because it would seem that I would imagine the same thing happened in Rashi's time, even though Rashi's commenting and just said what a stuma is, that a closed parsha is that which begins on one line and ends at the that which ends and begins in the same line with some space in the middle. Could imagine that Rashi would have seen the mezuzah that Tosfos is about to describe. But I don't know, it's our custom, laniach, to leave chelet ma'at, a little bit of space, betchilas shita, at the beginning of the line, but achakach maskal v'hayim shemaya, then to begin the paragraph v'hayim shemaya. So Tosfos describes exactly what we do. From wherever Rishar Echa ends, there's space, right? And then the next line begins v'hayim shemaya with some space at the beginning. This is what he says. He says, this is our custom. So this custom, the way we make our mezuzahs, goes back to at least the times of Tosfos. Hold on one second. Yeah, now. So says the Tosfos, Hasheman, perhaps, Gam zeh korei stuma. This too is called a stuma. Unless this is a quote from Rashi, I don't know, but I don't see Rashi saying this anywhere, at least not on our page. Unless it's a quote from Rashi somewhere else. No, I don't know. So he's saying like this: the way in which an open paragraph begins in the Torah is you have open till the end, and then the next line begins at the beginning of the next line. The next paragraph begins at the beginning of the next line. So Tosfos is suggesting, maybe perhaps when you leave a space at the beginning of your next line, it doesn't qualify as an open space, but as a closed one. Because by leaving that extra space, what you're saying is, I'm not starting the next paragraph the next line. I'm starting the next paragraph after leaving custom space. It just happens to be that half my space is at the end of that line and half my space at the beginning of this line. So perhaps by the very fact that we leave some space at the beginning of the next line where the second paragraph begins, it still gets qualified as a closed spacing. So I'm suggesting perhaps we do this because now we cover both bases. We have a psucha, we have an open-ended, like the way Rabbi Meir does it, because it goes to the end of the line. But we also, in some fashion, have it a closed paragraph because of the space here. And perhaps this is why we do it this way. Moreover, I saw here in the Shach, the comment in the Shulchan Aruch, which says this halacha about having both ways, he cites to a different halacha where it says that V'hoyam Shemaya, which is the next paragraph, should begin the seventh line. Should begin the seventh line. So if you open a mezuzah, any mezuzah,
Should go back to black.
you'll see Shema 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Open any mezuzah. I see all the mezuzahs that I have here in samples.
Yeah, there's a requirement. A minute, the 22 lines, and there's a specification
That's right.
for how each
There's,
line begins.
that's correct. We have a
minute
custom of how many lines the mezuzah should be, and that the seventh line should begin the first paragraph of Hayim Shemaya. Now, if the seventh line is going to begin the first paragraph of Hayim Shemaya, how could you possibly do a stuma, a closed paragraph, where the second paragraph begins on the same line, the other one closed? If the only definition of a closed paragraph is where the next paragraph begins in the same line as the previous one, which is with some space in the middle, how could you ever have the paragraph of Hayim Shemaya beginning on the seventh line? It can't begin the seventh line.
I said on the seventh line, maybe.
Or maybe on the seventh line,
Yeah,
but
maybe it's not the same minute as the
that's
beginning.
not the proper minhag of the whole thing that the Shach is telling us.
Yeah.
So maybe, perhaps, I'm suggesting here that this minhag that we do here, and I imagine, I haven't done enough time to go through all the commentaries and everything, but I imagine this has come up somewhere, and this is why it does the way we do it. We have an open-ended closing, plus we have a closed break in the way Rabbi Natam is saying that, the way Tosfos is saying that perhaps it's considered a closed break because there's space here and space here. Because a normal open ending would be the next paragraph begin at the beginning of the line, and this is taka. Every mezuzah I've seen is like this.
Yeah, Rabbi Natam does different.
Even though Rabbi Natam goes on to say something else.
Yeah,
That's why I'm stopping there. I'm not going to go through the whole Tosfos, but at least you see in the beginning of Tosfos that this practice where we have a mezuzah with this kind of spacing goes back at least till the 12th century.
So both these 22 lines and the seventh line, but
That's a custom.
Are
That's
custom.
It's custom, yes.
So if it's not written that way, it's still valid, but this is the standard practice.
No, but
Yeah.
this is what's been done for
Yeah.
a number of years. So it's in a sense, it's
Sephardi,
Okay.
Ashkenaz.
So the mezuzahs I have here, every single sample I have here has that. And these are mixed up mezuzahs of Sephardi and Ashkenazi.
So if it's considered as closed,
This is not a Sephardi writing, but I'll find a Sephardi writing here for you if you want.
No, I've seen it. I've worked on sofas and I see.
This is a Sephardi writing, it's the same thing.
All the mezuzahs are.
Have a look, sorry. At any rate, God willing, on Monday we have more discussion on what the custom is, and what's going to emerge is a very, very powerful message with respect to the Jewish custom. A very powerful message. Even in relation to Eliyahu and Avi coming and telling us something, our custom still has weight, as we shall see, God willing, on Monday. Have a wonderful Shabbos and a wonderful day.
that was the comment.